want to especially thank Louise for being willing to do this. Louise is not a person that wanted to be out front or to present herself as the perfect example of anything, but she is a person whose spirituality and intellect I respect so much, and I spent some time trying to talk her into this, and I am very, very grateful that you were willing to share with us in this way. And I told her to try to be honest, because we're not just interested in all the good stuff. We want to know what she's thinking, what her experience has been, so we can learn from it, because this is real life. So with that introduction, Louise, you can say whatever you want to say in the next few minutes.
Well, I know that Father Rich has a feeling that age and wisdom are synonymous, but they're really not, and so I came representing age, and here we have wisdom.
And wisdom is a woman, right?
I thought probably the best thing for me to do really was to respond to the suggestions that Father Rich made in this letter to us. And the first question was, are the practices you have found helpful in keeping you grounded in your faith? That's a big question. And I thought about it, and actually, no. I don't have any practices that keep me grounded in my faith. But I do say thank you every day, probably 20 times a day, for just being here, for having had a rich, full life, for having 97 years, maybe a couple more. And so it's simply that I don't have any kind of routine that would ground me in my faith. I feel grounded anyway. I don't know if you remember, but when Janet was here, we had a time when we were asked to make a little prayer corner. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but some people did, and took pictures of it. And that was a great idea. It didn't work for me, though.
Louise, I hope you're going to talk about
this little box.
That is your prayer box.
Everybody does ask
I have
me
put
about
my
this.
attentions in there a number of times.
It is a little prayer box, and I always wear it. And I put the names of my children in there. But just to get a little background on the subject of faith, I was born into a Christian family, and I was not baptized as a child because my father thought that I should find my own faith when I grew up. And look how well that turned out. I mean, because here I am at Grace Church.
That's right.
But I was baptized later as an adult in Chappaqua at the Church of St. Mary the Virgin, and I was confirmed in 1949 at the age of 34. I have a few notes because I do have senior moments, and I was hoping on the way here that this would not be my biggest senior moment. I've always been fascinated by how faith evolved. And when does it begin? How do we know we have faith? And so I was thinking back to the earliest church experiences that I had. And I went to church with my father, sometimes my brothers and my mother, but mostly my father, upstate in a Reformed Dutch church, which was very old. It was built in 1767, so it was before the Revolution. And it was it was a very beautiful example of colonial Dutch architecture, and it's now a part of the National Trust. So it's been preserved, and it's really quite a beautiful little example of early Dutch architecture. And it's a very different kind of church. When you go in, there are no icons. It's just a very bare church. There's no altar really. There are just 3 chairs up in the front, and even the cross is. When I last went there, I didn't see the cross, but then later I did see that they must have moved it. I've only been back there once, but I was impressed. And one of the reasons I'm bringing this up is that when I was a little girl, there was nothing to do during the service. There really were very few children who attended that church. And they were mostly farmers and townspeople, and a few summer people like us. And when we only went to church in the summer because I don't know what happened in the winter, but we never seemed to go to church in the winter. So the one thing that I could do when I was sitting in church very quietly with my father, because my father only had to just put up a hand and we knew we were quiet. So I used to look out the windows, and there are no stained glass windows in the Reformed Dutch Church. They're just very clear windows, very tall, and on the outside they have shutters to keep out the weather or to keep out too much sun. And the windows are really lovely. I actually brought a picture of that just because it's all part of the beginning of my faith, I think. Now, I used to look out the window, and I was very little, the windows were very tall, so I would just see the sky, and I would see the clouds, and the tops of the trees, and the leaves and the branches sort of making patterns. And it was something that you could watch forever. So I used to do that. And then one day I said to my father, God lives up there. And my father, who was always non-committal, said, possibly so. But I remember that was a firm conviction of mine. That was how I sort of started believing in something that was much bigger than I was, much greater than I was. And then from there, we had no Sunday school. There was no Sunday school in the old Dutch church. There was no outer building either. There was nothing but just the little church. I did bring a picture of it because I think the windows are so interesting and because I have great affection for them. And I do want to say that even as my faith has developed through teachings of the church and through just life and just being here, I still keep that sense of wonder that I had when I was just a child, looking up through the windows and believing that there was something very wonderful up there. So that is pretty much, I guess, where my faith is now. The second thing that Father Rich mentioned was experiences that have challenged or shaped your faith. And there have been a lot of them. I'm thinking mostly of things that happened at Grace Church that would have changed me or made a difference in my thinking. And I'm going to mention the most important one first. Father Godwin gave a sermon. It was in 1999. And it was a time when I was coming to church with a lot of conflict and a lot of family problems and a lot of things going around in my head, like what should I do, or what will happen, and that kind of anxiety. And also at that time, there were, instead of reality shows, we had soap operas. And people were very much engrossed in soap operas, and it was very easy for people to say, if they were upset over something, my life is just a soap opera. I mean, I didn't know I was guilty of saying it, and I think a lot of people felt that way. Life was just a soap opera. And Gowan said in his sermon, do not say, my life is a soap opera. This is your life. Claim it. And that really made me think. And I've thought about it a lot. And even, for instance, about 6 years ago, when my daughter Mary called me and said, Mom, I have scleroderma. I remember wanting to just back away from that telephone and just not even accept that. But I think, he was so right. This is your life. Claim it. So that was something that happened to me here. Then there were, how are we doing for time?
Plenty of time.
If you remember Alison Moore, probably some people do. She preached an interesting sermon that made me think. It didn't change my life, but it made me think differently. It was about now all the people in Bible study will know this, I know, but I didn't know it. It was about the story of the man who got people to work for him and offered to pay a penny for a day's work. And and some people came right away, some people came later, some people came at the last minute. But when the day was over, he gave all the workers a penny. And that seemed very unfair and very illogical to people who had worked all day. And Allison said, but these stories are not about the logic of law or about justice and individual rights. These stories are about the logic of gifts, and that's a different way of thinking. And I guess it just made me think about all the different ways you can think, and that there are a lot of different ways of thinking. Then there was, Janet preached a sermon one time about not being afraid, and she said that all through the sermon, do not be afraid. But then at the very last minute, just before Tim started the voluntary, when she was at the back of the church, I remember her voice rang out loud and clear, and she said, do not be afraid. And it was dramatic, and it stayed in my memory. It was one of the things that I just took from Grace Church. And Father Dreisel, I'm sure you all remember, a lot of you know him. He had a real sense of humor, and he sometimes preached about that. And one of the things he said that made me think he was a real human being. He said he knew God had a sense of humor. Otherwise, he never would have made a hippopotamus. He also told me a story that I think has a lot of meaning for people who are working with children. And maybe some of you already have heard this story, because he was in a Sunday school and looking around and admiring all the work that the children were doing. And they were making a little manger scene with, I don't know, grass and making a little, creating the baby and the mother and the father, and learning the story, the Christmas story. And Bert was so impressed by that he went home and told his wife Ada about it. And he said, they're learning so much. And she said, yes, yeah. They're learning that Christ was born in a shoebox. He could tell that story about himself, and you know, it was funny. So there's just a lot of things that have happened here in the church. And another thing, I've always noticed things that were on the wall that are in people's offices. And I remember in Father Harmon's office, there was a needlepoint, a little needlepoint sign, and it said, "Walk gently." And I've always thought of that, because it must have been very important to him, or he wouldn't have put it on the wall and kept it. So it must have had special meaning, and when I think of it, I think it does. Walk gently. It's not a bad thing. So I think maybe that's pretty much about things at Grace Church. Then there was the question about why do I come to Grace Church? And everybody here could answer that 10 times over. I mean, I think we all come because it's so special, but the music is very important to me. I don't know if Tim would agree with this, but I think music and religion were born together. That somehow that has to be. So I love the music. I love the icons, and I love all of the things that say Christianity that are part of the church. I come, of course, for the sermon, because I do want to hear something other than my own thoughts. And it's very hard to say exactly. Certainly for all the people I know, for all of you and millions of others, it seems like it's a big church and it's a friendly church, and you can feel. I always feel very good when I come in the door, and I also feel very good when I go out the door. So this is a very good place for me to be. I hope I'm not leaving out something terribly important, but coming to Grace Church is part of my life. And if anyone has any questions, I wish you would ask them. But the last thing was in this letter. What do you see as the future for Grace, and where should we be heading? I don't think we have as much to say about that as we think we do, because I think we have to respond to the population, to what Plains. It's a city. We're right in the middle of it. The outreach work that we do is really wonderful. I think we do a tremendous amount. I don't know if there's much more that we could do. I think we could fine-tune a little bit, maybe, some of the things that we do. There are some discrepancies. For instance, we all contribute to the Grace Church Community Center, and Neighbors is part of it. And Neighbors is a wonderful organization, and I've had contact with it, and I think Lesma does a wonderful job. But on the other hand, most people in Grace Church can't afford it. So that's an odd situation. And I think sometimes we get a little frenetic. Coffee hour is a little frenetic sometimes. I don't know if we could fine-tune that. It's wonderful to have food and coffee, but I know a lot of people who stand outside in the hall because they don't want to go in there. So I really have no answers for anything like that. I do know that I'm really very happy to be here. I'm surprised to see so many people. I certainly can't imagine how this will look in a film, but good luck. And I really don't, I'll be glad to answer questions. I hope somebody...
I have a question for you,
good.
Louise. Do you find when you paint that there's some sense of spirituality in your work as an artist?
Yes, to some extent. It might depend on when I'm painting or why I'm painting or, the subject or the... But when it's interesting, I know this is true of everybody who paints anything, even if it's a kid with a crayon. While you're doing that, nothing else is in your mind. And time will go by, hours can go by. I've had a whole half day disappear. That's what happens when you really get into painting.
Sylvia.
You're a member of the book club. How does that enhance your whole feeling about keeping the faith or how you think about faith in terms of the book club and what the readings and the discussions?
We haven't been reading religious things, and everything we have read has certainly been helpful in terms of expanding the way that we would look at life in general or at specific instances in our own life. I like the conversations in the book club because everybody's coming in from a different angle. I think you need as many different angles in your faith as you can get, really. I don't know if that answers your question, but I love the book club.
Verna, in the back.
I certainly appreciate your being a very valuable member of the book club, and your contributions are always so on point and absolutely remarkable. I don't know, if I were rich, I guess I'd feel a little nervous about what sermons I'm preaching because Louise has no But I certainly remember Don't Be Afraid. Yes, Don't Be Afraid. It was right after 9/11. And she, of course, had been so involved in it. But I remember coming to the church right after 9/11 and the Sunday after. It was nice.
Other comments or questions? Yeah, Elsie.
I don't have a question. I just have a comment that it's amazing, and it's wonderful to hear. And your memory is such. I mean, you say something you heard from each sermon. I can't do that. I remember currently, but all these years, it's just wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So I'm just so proud of you.
Well, thank you.
Other comments?
Louise, any suggestions on how to get the young people to come back to Grace Church?
Are there many people?
The kids go to Sunday school, and then they go to college, and then they don't come back. So, do you have any thoughts or suggestions on how to encourage young people to come back?
You know, I'm sorry, but that I'm not good on that subject because that's exactly what I did. I think it's pretty much what happens. And I'm not sure that it doesn't have to happen because college is a very different place. And all kinds of ideas are thrown at you, and you get involved in things which certainly do challenge a traditional faith. And you have to sort it out and put each thing in its place, and it takes more than 4 years to do it. I just don't have an answer for that.
What was your father's background? I mean, he was so progressive from what you tell us in allowing his children to find their own way and determine the way they're going to express their faith. I find that amazing. I'm so controlling.
Well, he was a lawyer. He actually was only with us on weekends, and we saw more of him in the winter when we all lived together. I think maybe the reason we didn't go to church in the winter was that we moved so much. The summer place was our own. We were always there. But he only came on weekends. He grew up in Ohio and was he was a very grounded person. He wasn't, I'm not sure he was very religious, but I think he thought we ought to be in some way because he said our prayers with us every night and read to us from the New Testament and from the Old Testament every night, and also, of course, read things like Peter Pan and Alice in Wonderland and the Goops and other kinds of books, so that he just read to us a lot. He was very involved with us. His own background, I think, it was more or less of a congregational Ohio type of, I don't know. It's hard for me to say.
For those who haven't seen Louise's art, it's absolutely spectacular.
Yes.
And
Well, that's very nice of you, Bill.
But it's true.
yeah.
They're up at Westchester Meadows, which is an independent sort of living facility. It's in Valhalla, up the hill from where I live. They're going to do an exhibit of all the art that I have left that I haven't sold.
Oh.
Because they have a gallery and they don't have anything much to put in it.
Oh.
When is this? What would be the date for that?
It will be sometime in November. It would not be an opening for the public, but I think people can go in and just look at it. It's on the main floor, and anybody can walk in. But I don't think they're doing anything much with an opening.
Maybe
But- No, I think Westchester Meadows is it's a real retirement, sort of private kind of place.
I think Carol wants to say
Well, I was going to mention Louise's contribution to great churches with her art, and how many of us have enjoyed her work on birthdays and anniversaries, because our anniversary is the same
Yeah.
as Louise's birthday.
Oh,
So she always sends us a beautiful card that she has made it, and it's so wonderful.
We have one of your cards in our living room, too.
We do.
Yeah.
Also, Louise's original artwork is on bookmark.
Yes.
Right.
Distributed. I think there are about 3 different
So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you all.